The atmosphere in the living room became suffocating when my mother loudly declared my humiliating social status. My name is Sierra. I am 24 years old, a woman who spent years enduring toxic judgments from her own blood. The tension on the sofa escalated rapidly as my parents continuously used demeaning words about my career to create a terrible impression. They desperately wanted to humiliate me thoroughly during this very first official introduction with my new partner. "She's a bar girl," my mom said when I brought my boyfriend home to meet my family. Leaning closely into my partner's personal space, my dad whispered in his ear, "She's trapped a lot of men before." I sat there with my arms crossed in complete silence, without offering a single word of defense. I just calmly observed how the man I loved would handle this overwhelming level of familial toxicity. He did not explode in anger or turn around to question my integrity after hearing those poisonous accusations. Instead of reacting predictably, my boyfriend calmly opened a video on the large screen right in front of them. The moving images immediately shifted the power dynamic in the room before he asked a piercing question. Looking directly at the two people who raised me, he asked, "Is this the girl everyone's calling a bar girl?" The blood instantly drained from my parents' faces as they stared at the undeniable truth playing before their eyes. If this story resonates with a hidden pain inside you, please subscribe to this channel right now. Every video we create is dedicated to someone who needs the strength to walk away from toxic relatives today. Hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications, return for the next chapters, because your best life begins when you finally stop apologizing. Looking at the absolute collapse on their faces right now, my mind drifted back to the years of living at the very bottom of their expectations in this bustling city of Reno. The glaring disparity in our household began very early between my older sister Georgia, who is currently 39 years old, and me at 24. My parents always provided her with the absolute best of everything, from expensive designer clothes to fully funded vacations, without ever asking any questions about the escalating costs. Meanwhile, they forced me to step out into the real world immediately after high school, to work as a server at a rather complex and gritty local tavern. I had to scrub sticky floors and deal with highly intoxicated patrons just to afford my basic daily survival, while she continued to live comfortably under their roof without lifting a single finger. My father, Scott, and my mother, Deborah, never missed a single opportunity to publicly mock my manual labor during our tense family dinners in the dining room. They consistently used deeply prejudiced language purposefully designed to completely extinguish any remaining confidence I held regarding my own future prospects. My mother would watch me return home smelling of cheap beer before delivering her favorite recurring verdict with a perfectly straight and emotionless face. "You're the kind of girl who'll always work for others, so do not expect much from life," she once stated bluntly to ensure I knew my exact place at the absolute bottom. Those cruel words were intentionally meant to keep me securely positioned in the designated role of the family failure, so my sibling could shine much brighter by comparison. However, the most cruel betrayal did not come from their daily verbal abuse, but rather from a devastating financial discovery I made a few years later. I found out that my parents had secretly used my social security number to open multiple high-limit credit cards entirely behind my back. They executed this fraudulent action specifically to absorb the massive shopping debts Georgia had accumulated to maintain her luxurious lifestyle illusions. Realizing that the people supposed to protect me were actively destroying my credit score to fund her vanity, shattered any remaining illusions of familial loyalty forever. Instead of allowing myself to break down completely over this profound betrayal, I consciously decided to transform that chaotic tavern environment into a highly practical business school. While wiping down sticky counters and delivering expensive drinks to demanding customers, I started focusing intensely on observing how the tavern owners actually operated behind the scenes. I paid close attention to how they managed their massive inventory ordering, and specifically, how they rotated their daily cash flow to keep the struggling establishment afloat. I proactively assigned myself to serve the exclusive VIP tables, where the wealthier clientele gathered to discuss their various lucrative business ventures over expensive imported liquor. Standing quietly in the background holding a serving tray allowed me to absorb valuable knowledge about building professional networks and closing intricate deals. I silently memorized the exact terminologies they used during their intense negotiations and noted the subtle psychological tactics they employed to gain leverage over their competitors. The gritty tavern provided me with a raw education in commerce that no traditional university could ever replicate, because the financial stakes were incredibly real. Armed with this newfound understanding of leverage and capital, I quietly initiated my own long-term exit strategy right under their oblivious noses. I secretly established a highly secure bank account completely disconnected from any residential address or contact information my toxic family could potentially access. Every single dollar of my cash tips went directly into that hidden vault, while I continued to play the role of the impoverished server at home. I was methodically building the solid financial foundation required for a permanent escape from their grip, while they remained entirely clueless about my growing independence. 3 years ago, I decided to execute my very first bold move by using my hidden savings to negotiate purchasing a stake in that decaying establishment. Instead of making a reckless, emotional decision to acquire the entire failing business outright, I strategically negotiated to buy a controlling stake alongside a silent partner. This calculated approach allowed me to secure the necessary operational authority while effectively minimizing the massive initial financial risks associated with a struggling hospitality venue. I utilized the negotiation tactics I had quietly absorbed from the wealthy patrons to secure a highly favorable valuation from the desperate previous owner. The transition from a lowly employee to the primary decision-maker felt incredibly empowering, but it also introduced a crushing wave of unprecedented operational responsibilities. My absolute lack of practical ownership experience quickly manifested into a disastrous reality during my very first month of operating the newly acquired venue. I tasted a miserable failure when I severely mismanaged the outgoing cash flow by overestimating our projected weekend revenue streams. This critical miscalculation completely drained our operating reserves, leading to a terrifying scenario where I almost lacked sufficient funds to cover the employee payroll alongside the exorbitant commercial rent. The crushing pressure of potentially losing everything I had sacrificed for kept me awake for days as I frantically reviewed the bleeding financial ledgers. I realized that pure ambition was entirely insufficient to sustain a complex business without implementing rigid financial controls over every single poured drink. During this critical breaking point, my lawyer Wyatt stepped in at the exact right moment to prevent the entire operation from collapsing completely. He meticulously audited the financial records, quickly identifying that the loose vendor agreements inherited from the previous management were actively draining our capital. "You're bleeding cash on inventory, so we need to restructure these vendor contracts immediately before you go bankrupt," Wyatt warned with a stern professional tone. I refused to let this venture die after enduring years of family humiliation just to get to this starting line. "I'll fix the margins. Just make sure my name stays completely off the public records," I replied decisively while staring at the negative balances. He swiftly drafted the necessary legal documents to establish a protective shell company designed specifically to obscure my true identity from any public scrutiny. By diligently applying the advanced management lessons I had absorbed from the elite VIP customers, the struggling tavern quickly transformed into a highly efficient operation. I aggressively renegotiated the beverage supply chains while simultaneously implementing strict inventory tracking systems that eliminated the previous internal theft, along with wasteful pouring habits. The first venue rapidly began generating a massive profit margin that far exceeded even my most optimistic initial financial projections. This sudden influx of reliable capital created a powerful financial momentum that allowed my hidden company to aggressively acquire 3 additional prime locations across the city. Each new acquisition followed the exact same restructuring blueprint, multiplying my hidden wealth exponentially, while my family remained completely oblivious to my rising corporate empire. Despite my rapidly expanding status as a multi-million-dollar business owner, I meticulously maintained the pathetic facade of an impoverished waitress whenever I returned to my parents' house. I continued to wear the same faded uniform shirt smelling of stale beer, complaining about imaginary abusive shift managers just to feed their superiority complex. I made absolutely sure to hand over my monthly room rent exactly on time, using crumpled cash, so they would never suspect the massive fortune accumulating in my corporate accounts. Scott and Deborah remained blissfully ignorant, thoroughly enjoying their false sense of dominance, while completely unaware that the daughter they constantly belittled was quietly buying up commercial real estate across their city. 20 months ago, I walked into a commercial real estate negotiation room and faced the absolute biggest obstacle in my ongoing expansion plans. My future boyfriend Mason appeared at this high-stakes meeting, acting as the primary investor of the premium downtown building I desperately wanted to lease. He meticulously scrutinized the introductory documents associated with my anonymous corporate structure, while displaying extreme skepticism regarding the actual financial capacity of my protective shell company. Looking directly at my youthful appearance across the wide conference table, he clearly assumed I completely lacked the practical operational experience required to successfully manage such an incredibly expensive commercial property. He abruptly closed the heavy legal folders while preparing to pack up his leather briefcase to leave the negotiation room entirely, without giving me a fair chance to speak. I don't lease premium spaces to shell companies with unproven track records, so we're done here, Mason stated coldly while pushing his executive chair back. I refused to let this prime location slip away after spending months analyzing the local foot traffic patterns to guarantee its future profitability. I immediately blocked his exit path by confidently slamming a thick stack of certified financial reports directly onto the table right in front of him. I needed to instantly shatter his preconceived notions by proving my absolute operational competence using the detailed net profit figures generated by my 3 currently thriving locations. Look at the net profit margins from the last 3 quarters because the numbers don't lie. Mason, I countered fiercely while pointing directly at the verified corporate banking statements. He paused his departure to carefully review the verified accounting documents detailing the massive revenue streams flowing consistently through my heavily optimized business models. His eyes scanned the exact percentages showing how I had aggressively minimized overhead costs, while simultaneously maximizing the daily customer spending averages across multiple venues. Mason was completely convinced by the undeniable reality of those incredibly impressive profit margins sitting right in front of his face. His initial dismissive skepticism rapidly transformed into a profound professional respect for my aggressive strategic mindset regarding the complex hospitality industry. He sat back down in his chair to officially sign the long-term commercial lease agreement that would permanently secure the flagship location for my rapidly growing corporate enterprise. Our strictly professional relationship eventually evolved into a deep romantic connection built upon a remarkably strong foundation of mutual ambition alongside absolute financial transparency. We started spending our evenings discussing commercial real estate yields instead of engaging in the typical superficial conversations that usually define early dating phases. As our emotional bond strengthened significantly over the following months, I decided it was time to finally reveal the dark truth concerning the ongoing credit fraud committed by my parents. I explained exactly why I was forced to utilize an anonymous corporate structure just to protect my hard-earned assets from my own biological family members. I detailed how my parents had maliciously destroyed my personal credit score simply to fund the endless vanity purchases demanded by my older sister. Mason listened carefully to the traumatic history of my financial abuse without offering any empty pity or unsolicited advice about forgiving them. He fully understood the brutal necessity behind my extreme legal boundaries because he recognized the severe danger posed by greedy relatives who view their children as nothing more than disposable income sources. His unwavering support solidified my absolute trust in him right before I decided to bring him home to meet the very people who had repeatedly tried to ruin my future. Last Friday evening, Mason's car parked in front of my parents' house to initiate an evening overflowing with profound calculation alongside subtle manipulation. I intentionally walked through the front door wearing a remarkably simple casual sweater that starkly contrasted with the luxurious environment my family desperately tried to project for our wealthy guest. Georgia immediately emerged from the hallway wearing an incredibly elegant designer dress, undoubtedly purchased using the fraudulent credit funds she drained from my stolen identity. She approached Mason with an overbearing eagerness disguised perfectly beneath a carefully rehearsed posture of sophisticated hospitality to capture his undivided attention. Instead of employing cheap or overly obvious physical flirting tactics that might expose her true desperation, she applied a highly calculated strategy designed to showcase her supposed intellectual superiority. She wanted to instantly establish herself as a high-value woman who thoroughly understood the complex financial world that my partner inhabited daily. Holding a glass of expensive wine she clearly could not afford, with her actual income, Georgia steered the living room conversation directly toward complex investment portfolios. She actively attempted to demonstrate her fake financial literacy to prove she was perfectly fluent in the language of wealth, while completely ignoring my silent presence on the sofa. I have been looking into commercial real estate yields lately, so what is your take on the current market shifts? Mason, Georgia asked, while leaning forward to sound remarkably knowledgeable about capital allocation. It is a complex market. Georgia, definitely not something you just read about in a magazine, Mason replied with polite reservation while maintaining a strict professional distance from her obvious advances. My parents eagerly joined the discussion to actively manufacture a completely fabricated high-class atmosphere right inside our distinctly average suburban living room. They continuously validated every single ignorant point Georgia made regarding the national economy to forcefully highlight her as the perfect intellectual equal worthy of a successful property investor. Scott enthusiastically exaggerated her mundane administrative office job duties to make them sound like executive corporate responsibilities, wielding massive institutional authority. They operated seamlessly as a highly synchronized unit, executing a premeditated psychological routine meant to elevate her social status by building a towering pedestal constructed entirely out of absolute lies. Interspersed seamlessly between those glowing praises for her favorite child, my mother skillfully inserted razor-thin comments specifically formulated to rapidly degrade my own social standing. Deborah weaponized her polite maternal smiles while dropping subtle remarks heavily implying that I remained entirely ignorant regarding the sophisticated upper-class world they were currently discussing. She smoothly transitioned from praising Georgia's fictional stock market insights to loudly asking me if the tavern patrons had tipped me well enough to afford my upcoming utility bills. Her toxic intention was to visually paint me as an uneducated manual laborer, completely out of place, sitting next to a wealthy commercial developer inside their home. Throughout this entire agonizing domestic performance, Mason maintained the absolute minimum level of expected social politeness without ever validating their delusional grandeur. He answered their probing financial inquiries using intentionally vague generalizations that offered absolutely zero personal insight into his actual corporate holdings or future development plans. While he kept his facial expressions perfectly neutral to avoid triggering a premature confrontation, His sharp eyes silently observed every single toxic dynamic unfolding within that suffocating space. He watched exactly how they systematically attempted to crush my dignity, while simultaneously pushing Georgia forward like a highly priced commodity waiting to be purchased. He was quietly gathering all the necessary psychological evidence to fully comprehend the exact depth of the sickness infecting my biological family before executing our final plan. Right before the sweet dessert was finally served to the dining table, I walked toward the kitchen to get a glass of water and accidentally caught the scattered fragments of a truly ruthless plan. Approaching the slightly ajar wooden door silently to avoid alerting anyone congregating inside, I could not hear the complete conversation occurring within those confined walls, but my ears distinctly caught highly specific phrases floating directly through the narrow gap. The hushed tones belonging to my father carried the explicit instructions to make me look incredibly pathetic, alongside a direct reference regarding a golden opportunity deliberately manufactured for Georgia to exploit immediately. Hearing those specific words spoken with such calculated cruelty forced me to stop completely in my tracks to process the magnitude of their deception. I rapidly pieced those fragmented pieces of overheard information together with the highly unusual behavior they had all just displayed while sitting collectively around the formal dinner table. Their sudden, overwhelming support for my older sibling combined with their relentless, subtle attacks against my personal character perfectly aligned with a malicious strategy engineered to completely ruin my personal image. I quickly deduced their ultimate objective was to disgust my wealthy partner enough to make him abandon me instantly, so they could immediately swap my sister into my recently vacated place. They honestly believed they possessed the psychological intelligence to manipulate a highly seasoned commercial real estate developer into discarding his actual girlfriend just to pursue an unemployed woman heavily burdened with fraudulent debt. Experiencing this horrific realization firsthand did not trigger any emotional breakdown or prompt desperate tears to stream down my face while standing alone in the middle of the quiet hallway. Instead of feeling heartbroken over their ultimate betrayal, I only felt a piercing coldness traveling rapidly down my spine as I finally understood the terrifying reality concerning my toxic biological family. I fully accepted that the absolute final boundary of our shared bloodline had been completely erased by their overwhelming greed alongside their deeply delusional ambitions for upward social mobility. The profound realization that my own parents were actively plotting to destroy my happiness just to elevate their favorite child permanently extinguished any lingering sense of familial obligation I still carried. Need to make him see she's just a bartender. Once he drops her Georgia, you move in, my father instructed through his broken whispers. Just wait for the right moment. I'll bring up her past. My mother replied in a dangerously low voice. Standing completely motionless in the dimly lit corridor right outside the kitchen, I calmly pulled my smartphone from my pocket to send Mason a very brief but crucial text message under the radar. I explicitly instructed him to remain completely silent during the upcoming conversation, while advising him to mentally prepare himself to witness a highly orchestrated smear campaign designed specifically to destroy my reputation. I desperately needed him to play along with their toxic performance, without interrupting them, so they would confidently step right into the devastating trap they were currently digging for themselves. I wanted them to feel absolutely victorious in their cruel manipulation, right up until the exact second we systematically dismantled their entire fabricated reality. After ensuring the encrypted text message was successfully delivered to his device, I smoothly pushed the swinging door completely open while maintaining a perfectly neutral facial expression, as if nothing unusual had just occurred. The three guilty conspirators instantly jumped back from their tight whispering circle, while awkwardly attempting to act naturally around the marble kitchen island to hide their malicious intentions. I ignored their palpable panic completely to grab a simple glass of cold water from the refrigerator before turning around to casually stroll right back out into the main living area. I gladly left those treacherous relatives behind in that enclosed space to continue feeding their pathetic delusions regarding their imminent success at stealing my incredibly successful partner. Their desperate attempts to control my destiny were about to collide violently with a reality they could never possibly comprehend. A few minutes after we settled back into the living room, my mother delivered her calculated insult, officially triggering the devastating trap they had foolishly set for themselves. Following my deliberate silence in response to their toxic verbal barrage regarding my supposedly inferior social status, Mason smoothly transitioned into his designated role. He calmly reached into his premium leather briefcase to retrieve his high-resolution tablet without displaying even a single ounce of visible anger toward their blatant disrespect. He placed the sleek electronic device directly onto the center of the glass coffee table before pressing play on a recently published financial news segment. The crisp footage featured me walking confidently out of a massive downtown hospitality venue, wearing an expensive tailored suit while shaking hands with prominent city officials. The bold journalistic caption rolling continuously across the bottom of the glowing screen clearly detailed a highly lucrative commercial investment deal successfully closed by a rising female entrepreneur. Georgia immediately reacted to this irrefutable visual evidence by deploying her favorite psychological manipulation tactic just to desperately protect her incredibly fragile ego from total destruction. She forced a highly unnatural laugh that echoed awkwardly throughout the quiet room while waving her manicured hand dismissively at the digital display sitting before her. She desperately insisted that the successful businesswoman featured prominently in the professional broadcasting footage was merely a coincidental look-alike possessing similar facial features. She absolutely refused to accept the terrifying reality that the younger sibling she constantly degraded had somehow achieved a monumental level of financial supremacy she could never possibly reach. That's just some promotional video, so it's obviously not Sierra because she pours drinks for a living. Georgia stubbornly denied while pointing a trembling finger toward the glowing screen. Mason did not allow her pathetic attempt at gaslighting to survive for more than a single second inside that deeply uncomfortable residential space. He leaned slightly forward to look directly into her visibly panicked eyes with an expression of absolute professional disdain before dismantling her entirely fabricated reality. Actually, Georgia, I own the building she's walking out of, plus, she signed the master lease. Mason fired back coldly to permanently crush her remaining delusional fantasies, seizing the perfect opportunity to finish the psychological demolition they originally initiated. I finally broke my prolonged silence to deliver the ultimate killing blow to their misplaced arrogance. I clearly enunciated the exact legal name of my protective shell company before explicitly detailing the massive controlling stakes I currently held across 4 highly profitable metropolitan locations. I purposefully mentioned acquiring the exact same gritty tavern where they had spent years mocking me for scrubbing sticky floors to survive their intentional financial neglect. I laid out the multi-million-dollar revenue streams flowing through my corporate accounts, ensuring they understood the absolute magnitude of the empire I built entirely without their assistance. Watching the arrogant smirks permanently melt off the faces of my father and my mother provided an incredibly profound sense of long overdue emotional vindication. They rapidly transitioned through a chaotic phase of stammering denial before completely collapsing under the crushing weight of their own monumental ignorance regarding my actual capabilities. Suddenly realizing an absolute gold mine was sitting right on their worn fabric sofa, their entire hostile attitude flipped instantly toward a sickening display of transparent flattery. Scott and Deborah shamelessly attempted to utilize the sacred concept of unconditional family unity to completely gloss over the unforgivable insults they had hurled at me just moments prior. They started forcing unnervingly bright smiles while frantically backpedaling on their previous degrading comments about my career choices. My mother even audaciously suggested that my older sibling should immediately become my executive vice president to keep the incredible new wealth safely within the immediate family. They began weaving pathetic narratives about how they always secretly knew I possessed brilliant business acumen, desperately hoping to secure unlimited access to the corporate treasury they had just discovered. This Monday morning, I decided to permanently terminate this toxic connection by delivering a direct strike against their absolute weakest point, using the undeniable power of the legal system. Wyatt officially delivered a formal legal document directly to my parents' suburban doorstep, demanding they take full financial responsibility for the massive fraudulent credit card debt they accumulated. The comprehensive lawsuit clearly stated that failing to completely pay off those unauthorized balances within the strict legal timeframe would result in severe criminal charges regarding felony identity theft. My parents panicked immediately upon realizing they could no longer hide behind their biological parental status to escape federal banking regulations. The harsh practical consequences materialized rapidly as my parents' credit scores suffered catastrophic destruction across all major reporting agencies. This sudden financial ruin effectively prevented them from securing any additional loans required to maintain the ridiculously ostentatious lifestyle they constantly projected to impress their neighbors. While there was no immediate threat of an impending housing foreclosure, the massive pending litigation forced Georgia to finally abandon her entitled delusions of grandeur. She had to swallow her massive pride to aggressively seek a grueling manual labor job simply to cover her basic daily living expenses without relying on my stolen funds. I officially changed my personal phone number to permanently sever all available communication channels with the deceitful individuals who actively tried to ruin my future. I stepped confidently into a completely peaceful reality alongside Mason, where absolute financial freedom permanently replaced the suffocating psychological manipulation I endured for so many wasted years. As representatives of this channel, we proudly present this story for educational purposes to clearly convey a powerful message regarding personal boundaries. We want to demonstrate exactly how to handle severe familial crises using sheer logic alongside the protective power of the law. Evaluating the situation objectively, the female protagonist decisively protected her own future by completely severing all ties with her abusive relatives. She bravely refused to tolerate their financial exploitation or their malicious psychological manipulation any longer. Consequently, the antagonists suffered the inevitable legal repercussions resulting directly from their incredibly arrogant choices. Looking back at the ruins of the people who once proudly called themselves family, I recognized an incredibly sharp truth about life. Bloodlines do not grant anyone the automatic right to drain your resources, deceive your trust, or trample your self-esteem. Establishing crystal-clear financial boundaries remains the absolute strongest protective shield for any independent adult woman facing severe familial exploitation. Maintaining absolute silence combined with undeniable real-world success serves as the most ruthless counterattack against truly toxic individuals who desperately want to see you fail. Severing ties completely is never an act of cruelty, but rather the only viable method to permanently protect your own future, along with your inner peace. We sincerely thank you for accompanying us to listen to my story until the very final minutes. We deeply appreciate your continued support. Have you ever discovered your most beloved relatives exploiting your personal finances or ruining your credit score for their own gain? How exactly did you handle that situation? Please share your thoughts along with your own experiences down in the comments section below.